Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. How it's more than phishing, how to supercharge your security awareness training. So we'll just give a couple of minutes. Well, we are a minute early, I think. So we'll go live in a few minutes. If I had elevator hold music, I would play that for you right now. But yeah, we will be starting in about 2 minutes. So thank you. So hello everybody again, I'm Javad Malik and welcome to this webinar. Yeah, we're just about to kick off. If you have any questions throughout this, then pop them in the Q&A box. And then once the webinar's over, I will hopefully get through to them. So welcome once again, absolute pleasure to be here presenting for you. It's more than phishing, how to supercharge your security awareness training. The important question. So I'm Javad Malik. I've worked in cybersecurity my entire career. And yeah, I've done stuff. I worked for KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. I help tens of thousands of customers around the world, and I can honestly say for me, it's personally the best place I've ever worked. So let's start with a thought-provoking quote. What got you here won't get you there. And I think this is true for a lot of what we do in security. The landscape changes, the approaches sometimes we take adapt along the way. And for any of you who've been around the cybersecurity world for about 10, 15 years or so, you probably remember in the early days, security awareness training was very dry, very to the point. It was normally when you joined, you'd be given a PowerPoint presentation, or through the year, someone would say, watch this video. I remember in a bank I used to work, they used to wheel out a TV with a video recorder, and they used to pull out a tape and put it in and play it. And that would have a whole bunch of compliance things, and security was a portion of it. But we're a far cry from where we were at that time. But while we have improved, we've got far better sort of awareness material out there, and simulated phishing plays a big part in helping employees become aware of security risks and what to do with them. That isn't the end goal, and there are limitations with that approach as well. So how do we progress beyond that? And I'd say the first thing that we need to look at is really the relationship that the security team or the IT team that is responsible for security awareness and bringing the whole team together. How is that relationship, and what is that built on, and how's the security department perceived? There are many examples you've seen around over the years around the world where people have reacted really, really poorly to a simulated phishing email. And one of the reasons for that is that it's sent, it's inappropriate for the time, possibly the culture is not mixed. People have felt cheated about it. And most importantly, that the security team was perceived to be some sort of villain who were just like trying to trip people up in this whole thing. And I think that's what makes a really bad. Then you can deliver the best simulated fish, or you can deliver the best content, but if people aren't receptive to it, or that trust isn't built there, they are going to feel like, well, these people are just trying to trick me, or they're just trying to waste my time. So I went out and asked a few security experts, how do you think, what are some of your observations between how security teams are normally found interacting with the users? And Rowena Fielding said that, there's lots of militarized analogies and it's not conducive to fostering a spirit of collaboration. Mo Amin said that, oftentimes security can be perceived as a department of no, but if it is a department of no, if you are going to say no to something, offer an alternative. So someone wants to transfer a file from a sensitive file from one organization to another. You don't just say no, just say, okay, don't do it using email, for example. Maybe you need to use this system, or maybe you need to encrypt it like this, or maybe you need to take these precautions before sending it. Ed Tucker said, well, maybe technology people aren't the best people to deliver the message at all. If you have a marketing team or someone in charge of comms or PR, engage them. They can maybe help you fashion the statement a lot better and make it more digestible. And this is where first impressions really count. So a hotel chain done a survey of their residents guests that come and stay there. And they found that people that had scored higher in their check-in experience, so as soon as they enter their check-in experience, if that was a pleasant one, so if they scored an 8, 9, 10, then they would score everything else higher. And if they had a poor check-in experience, then everything else would be scored poorer. And so a good thing to try is like when people join and you're part of the onboarding process, or think about the first interactions you have with people. If it's if you can make that as pleasant as possible, or as open as possible, as understanding as possible, that will impact your ongoing relationship. If the first time a user ever gets to interact with a security message is a negative one, where they're getting told off or they're getting shamed or perceived shame, then that is going to leave a negative mark for ongoing. It's important to provide the right information. Sometimes it's easy to overload people with too much information. So Transport for London, when they put up LCD screens on their tubes and bus stops and what have you, that actually improved the customer experience so much more, because now you know when your next train or bus is coming and where it's heading to. So you can relax for the few minutes. Maybe you don't need to rush to the first train that arrives at the platform because it's not the one you need. So just providing the right information, you don't need to provide all the information, but just providing the right information without changing anything else can lead to a more pleasant experience. And also, I think putting information in the right context is really important. It's very easy to say, well, phishing is really important, and threat intelligence is, oh yeah, we need that ingested into our SIM and to do this, and but a lot of times it's just not providing the right context to people. So putting things in the right context can just help frame things in the right way. So if you look at these scribbles, they're identical, but what are they? Is it half a butterfly or something? I don't know. But if I put the letters A and C to either side, all of a sudden the scribble in the middle begins to look like the letter B. And if I put a 12 and 14 to either side, all of a sudden it looks like the number 13. And this is a trick that criminals use quite a lot. When they send a phishing email to people, they will try to frame the context in a certain way. They will like that, I am the CEO, or I am your very important partner, and we want you to change the bank details into which you pay us. And if they framed it in the right way, they will overlook any of the red flags that are there, and they will say, okay, yes, I will now change the banking details. And that's how a lot of losses occur. I think this is also a trick that, or a technique that we can use, is like when we say to people, don't plug in an unknown USB drive into your machine, don't let someone tailgate you into the office, don't click on a phishing email. If we provide the right context, and this is something that only depending on how the culture is within your organization, what that right context is, that can be far more powerful than simply just giving a list of do's and don'ts. I put this here, 10 times 1 does not equals 1 times 10. And that's because oftentimes when we're reporting security awareness or security behaviors, it's a very human problem. It's not a technical problem. Yeah, oftentimes we try to report things in the same way that technologies report it. But, you know, it's very different. Think of it like this. If you have one vulnerability, the same vulnerability on 10 computers, that's different from 10 vulnerabilities on the one computer. Yet when you aggregate the results together and you report them up, they all look the same. So just be mindful about what you're counting, why you're counting it, and whether that actually shows that you're making any actual progress, or whether you're just counting stuff for the sake of counting stuff. In terms of the approach, I really like this quote: "A flower is a weed with a marketing budget." And this comes into that same approach. It's like, how do you make things so it doesn't feel like, oh, another training, and something that's more engaging? And you know, one thing we tend to do is, as an industry, is like, if people are doing the wrong thing, we won't try to change the message. We'll just say, well, clearly the answer is more training. So we need to think probably more like marketers and less like trainers. So think about behavior in the long term, and think about the key behaviors you want to change, and think about how you can reinforce that message over a long period of time. So rather than saying to someone, watch this 30-minute video, give them a 2-minute video, and then give them a poster, and then give them a screensaver, but hit them with smaller doses, but more consistently. And over time, that's proven to show more behavior change. And that's what we want. Ultimately, we want people to make the right decisions. I'd even argue that, you know, if someone's doing the right thing, do we actually even care whether they understand why they're making that decision? And that's something that's probably beyond the scope of this. Like, it's a longer debate, but you know, I mean, I look at it, if my children are crossing the road safely, they're looking both ways, making sure that there's a crossing and it's appropriate, there's no cars and they cross. Whether or not they fully understand all the dangers of the road is kind of like secondary. As long as they're being safe, then that's all I care. So storytelling is a really, really powerful way. And we've seen it at Know before. So there's this show that, it really is a show. It's like a Netflix series. It's called The Inside Man. And we're on season 4 now. Season 4 just came out last month. And it's like a drama. And so people get invested in the characters and they start watching it, and there's character development and there's some plot twists and this happens, that happens, what have you. And the interesting thing is that most companies or clients, customers, they don't make this a mandatory training. They just have it there as an offer for people to watch it. And this is by far one of the most watched bits of security awareness training out there, you know, amongst customers, because and it's something that's not forced upon them. Why? Because there's a story there. So they watch the story and they learn something about security in between. This is why you know, the art and craft of storytelling is so important. And it's why I could probably remember lines from a movie I saw when I was 10 years old much better than a white paper that I read 10 minutes ago. So I could have read something like, you know, a blog this morning, and maybe I'll remember the rough title or some of the key points. But you asked me about Back to the Future that I watched, like, you know, 30 years ago or whatever, and I'll tell you in great detail everything. And so sometimes it's about how we're positioning that message, and it's not just about delivering that, but, you know, making it stick. Perceptions really matter as well. And this is where sometimes it's really easy, especially if you work in a technology team, to be like, well, we've delivered this, so therefore that box is ticked. But, you know, it's like the weather. You can see over here, it says 24, but it feels like 22. So why the need to put something, it feels like 22? Well, because like our perceptions don't really care what science says. Science might be accurate, and we've got the thermometers or whatever they're using to measure the temperature. But if our body is saying, well, it feels a lot colder than 24, it feels a lot hotter than 24, then that's what we're going to go with. And the same principle applies to security awareness. When we're teaching someone about, you know, don't do this, this is a bad behavior, or this is like risky. If they've done it 20 times already and nothing bad's happened, their inner perception is going to be like, well, maybe risky for amateurs, but I'm a pro at this. Also, I think there's something to be said about how challenging or how sometimes I think condescending the security message can be made. So Betty Crocker, they came up with the original cake mix, which was like pour water into the mix, stick it in the oven, and hey presto, you've got a beautiful cake. And when they first came out with this, it didn't really sell very well. And so they tried to do a bit of research, and they found out that, well, it's a bit too easy to make a cake like this, and people felt it was a bit of cheating. So then the question was like, well, how do we make it so it's still simple to make, but it doesn't feel like cheating? And so they changed the recipe so that now people had to add 2 eggs of their own into the cake mix. And suddenly sales just like, they just like went up through the roof. The point being that people, while they don't want something that's too difficult, they also don't want it too easy, and they like to solve problems themselves. Sometimes we are too keen to push on our solution to people as to this is how we will do it. Sometimes what we should do instead is to take the other approach and ask people, how would they like to go about meeting us in achieving this objective? And people would sometimes have far better ways. And if they feel involved or part of that process or invited into that conversation, they will adopt those behaviors far better and in a much sort of like longer term view. The third aspect, I think, is culture. And this is something that's really important. And the understanding of this has increased greatly over the last 10 years or so. And there's been lots of research done. And, you've probably heard a lot about people talk about creating a culture of security, but what exactly does that mean? So here at KnowBe4, like we actually acquired a company 3 years ago called Culture, based out of Norway. And they've been that division now of KnowBe4 has been one of the foremost of security culture for many years. And, there's these, 7 aspects to it. There's responsibilities, cognition, norms, compliance, communications, and attitudes that they break it into. It's a very scientific approach and how they understand it. I'm not going to go into detail on this because I don't want to make this a bit too academic, but they have like models that are based on like how if you increase your security behavior, then the risk overall of the organization goes down and the security maturity goes up and what have you. And this is all available as white papers and stuff. If you get in touch afterwards, if you're interested in finding out more than happy to share some of this. But you can see that this delves in. But I'll say that after reading a lot of that and looking at what local organizations are doing, I'd say as a broad statement, this isn't to be taken personally, I say you're doing security culture wrong. And that's often taken the wrong way. And I said, well, think about Martin Luther King Jr. and what did he say when he wanted to invoke a big, large-scale culture change, which basically most movements are. They are a big culture change that we're trying to go through. He said, I have a dream. He didn't go out and say, I have a 7-point strategy. We are going to like Wednesday, we're going to create our PowerPoints. Tuesday, we're going to do this. Next week, in 90 days, we'll achieve these milestones. Because that's like a project. That's not a culture change. And when we talk about culture change, we want to sell the vision, the dream, and embed that within the very fabric of the broader organization. So when you go about making this culture change, people are like, well, how do you go about doing it? And I'd say, well, the law of diffusion of innovation is a really good model to look at. Rather than trying to change everybody in the organization, because that requires a tremendous amount of effort over a sustained period of time and might not always be successful, is to focus on the early adopters. And then if you focus on those earlier, that first 15% of your organization, that can help you bridge that gap and push it into the tipping point. And this is where culture carriers or security advocates or security champions, whatever you want to call them, people within the organization who are naturally more inclined to learn about security or adopt those secure behaviors, they become a critical part of your overall strategy. They can help you create leverage. So if you reward people for good security behavior, that can help promote other good behavior. A lot of it is about consistency. So sometimes we go with a big push, and then 3 months later, no one's heard from anything. But if you have a consistent strategy, and that's what, so something, even with the simulated phishing that we do at KnowBe4, we see that organizations that do it more frequently over a long period of time, they actually see great benefits. But if you stop doing it after 3 months, then behaviors will return back to that baseline. So it's about keeping things in back of mind. I mean, a good example is that of road signs. When you're driving along the road, how many road signs do you encounter? And you know what the speed limit is, or you know what this means or that means, but they'll reinforce it consistently just to make sure that it remains top of mind. To change culture, it's really, really important and a good idea to get your exec team to share stories from their perspective. And so if someone, say, like got hit by a phishing email, maybe they clicked on it, maybe they didn't, maybe they spotted it, maybe they did, and then they reported it to IT, whatever the outcome might be, if they share that story, it does a few things. One thing is it normalizes that this thing can happen to anyone. Secondly, it removes any of the stigma or shame that people might feel associated with, oh my God, I got a phishing email, or a scammer phoned me up and I gave them some information of the phone, and later I realized that, or even I didn't realize, but IT told me that. But if you can share those stories from the top, it actually creates that open environment where people can start talking about these things and sharing things. And this is where it's important to embed security culture into your overall organizational culture. It's very difficult to share only stories about the security, but if your execs aren't sharing anything about other stuff anyway. So again, it's like if you're an exec or a manager, creating that environment of openness can really help. And then having the IT team or the security team there to respond to any queries or concerns that people have, that's also a big part of the piece as well. Back in the 60s, 70s, they were there's a big campaigns about reducing drink driving. So a bunch of behavioral scientists came up with the term designated driver, and they took the concept to Hollywood and they said, screenwriters, would you mind embedding this concept? And they were like, yeah, it doesn't harm our story. So they started talking about designated driver. So when a group of friends was going out, one of them's like, I'm the designated driver. So then friends wouldn't put pressure on them to drink, and the bartender wouldn't put pressure on it. No, it would be socially acceptable. And then it becomes socially acceptable for everyone. Like, oh, I'm going out with a bunch of friends, who's the designated driver? And that really makes it socially acceptable. And if you can use some of your security champions or people that are more invested in security as your designated security driver. So if they're the person within the office that always locks their machine when they walk away, always challenges that stranger, that can be behavior that others adopt as well. Restaurants understand this trick. So what they'll do is, if you've gone out for dinner and you're a massive table of 10 and you're there, what they'll do, if there's a table of 2 next to you, they might bring out free complimentary dessert for the table of 2. And the reason for that is that if they know that your table of 10 will look over and say, well, wow, that looks amazing, we'll have 10 of those for us as well. So for the price of marketing, which is 2 free dessert, they've sold 10 desserts. And again, if people can see others, colleagues exhibiting good security behavior, that's one thing. But then if they're getting rewarded for that good security behavior, that could also be a key encouragement factor. And that has a really big knock-on effect to the point that becomes your organizational culture. Choice architecture is a really important concept as well. And it's basically, a lot of it's built around nudges or what have you, but you don't limit someone's choice technically or otherwise, but you offer them a choice in a way that it nudges them towards a direction that you would like them to go to. So, the classic example in a restaurant, again, is like you ask for water, they say, well, would you like still or sparkling? At which point it becomes a bit awkward to ask for just tap water. So they've architected it in a way that, you go for something that's profitable for them. But again, we see this on some websites. When you type in a password, there'll be like a face next to it. So the longer or the stronger your password is, the face turns into a smiley face. And if it's not, then it turns into a sad face. So they're not technically stopping you from choosing a weak password, but they're trying to nudge you, encourage you into choosing a strong password. You've probably seen it on the roads as well. Sometimes it's not a speed camera, but it's just one of those digital displays, and it'll just flash up the speed. And if you're going fast, then there'll be a sad face or an angry face on it. But my son, he loves it because every time it's an angry face, he starts having a go at me for driving too fast. One of the extra advantages of having these things architected in a secure way is that it can start benefiting lots of other things. So in the 70s in Berkeley, they talked about the curb cut effect or the dropped curb effect, where they campaigned for dropped curbs to aid wheelchair users. And then they found that, well, it doesn't just help wheelchair users, it actually helps anyone with a pushchair or luggage or a trolley or a cycle. Anything with wheels basically benefits from it. So it's important to look at how you can leverage any security changes for your broader organization changes. You will find that if you start implementing them, you will find that actually creates more advantages than you might have initially thought. So I'll leave you with some actions, not too many, but I think it's really, really important to understand how your security department, and if you don't have a security department, whoever's responsible for pushing security out to people, how is that being perceived? If every time you roll out an update, people are grumbling, or people are rolling their eyes, or they don't want to update it, or they question why, then I'd say maybe even pause that technical update, but take time to help people to understand why that's important, get people on side. Because if people are on side, then they will actually adopt that secure behavior with or without that technical control mandating that secure behavior. So that's really, really important. So I think if having that security department brand or that security brand amongst people really solidified, I think that's absolutely vital. So then even if you're running legacy systems, stuff that can't be patched, or you don't have the budget to implement a fancy new bit of kit like an endpoint detection response thing, then at least you have the human factor there that is like undertaking better risk decisions. So overall your risk profile is, as an organization, is being managed. It's not the only thing. I don't say don't invest in anything and only invest in the human, but I think it's an important aspect, and that can only be done when people feel on side. It's important to balance out your training. The training is like your mandatory sort of things that are like very specific, and it's very like, we are at risk of ransomware, so therefore look out for this, do this, don't do this. That's training, and it's very, very focused. But then have a much broader net cast for awareness. So those are things like your posters, your screensavers, your non-mandatory video training, or games, or what have you. And that is what will really just heighten that understanding of people. And this is stuff that people can not just use in the office, but they can take home and start advising their friends and family, like, hey, maybe a password manager is a good idea, or maybe we should enable multi-factor authentication, or maybe we shouldn't reply to every email that says that we've won a holiday or something. Try to match your strategy with your culture, and make it not just security specific, but organizational culture. Don't try to boil the ocean. Just focus on a few shifts in behavior. And one of the things I think is really useful is to go through your last year or 2 years incident logs. So what caused an incident over the last 2 years? And that should give you a really good map of what the consistent underlying root causes are for incidents within your organization. So if it's like, stuff going missing from the office, that could be one type of incident. And the other one could be virus on the computer because someone clicked on a link or visited a dodgy website or something like that. So that gives you like 2 or 3 things that say, okay, the things we really need to focus on is physically securing our office, challenging strangers, and we need to get people to stop clicking on dodgy links or going to dodgy websites. So all of a sudden, that makes it a much more easily managed thing. So you've only got 2 or 3 behaviors to focus on, and then you can just map out a strategy over the year to focus on that. Honor the strengths of your existing culture. So don't try to go against culture. If your whole organization culture is pointing in one direction, don't try to force yourself against it, but rather work with it. And have some ways to measure and monitor the progress you're making, because these are things that are really hard to measure in small snapshots, but over a period of time, it becomes quite clear as to like where you're doing well or not. And I use recycling as an example often. Like when I was young, the concept wasn't really out there that much. There was just one general waste bin in every household and office and school and what have you. But now you go into any office and you'll see like 5, 7 different bins, and then you're like, oh, which color does this thing go into and that thing go into? But it's a normal thing. It's normal. But that didn't happen overnight. That took a long time, and you need to find ways of measuring that so that inevitably you're always going to get asked like, what progress have you made? So at least you have the data there to back it up. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention. I will take any questions and any comments you might have. So pop them in the Q&A box, or if you're, or if you're shy, you can always email me or tweet me or something like that. But okay, let me go into the questions. So, okay, so yeah, will the slides be available after the event? Yes, they will be available after the event. That's the standard. Thank you, Phil, for your comment. And yeah, what would be the first shift in behavior you would choose to start off with? That's a fantastic question. That's not an easy one to answer. And I think that really depends on where the threats are within your organization. Like if I can speak from an external perspective, because externally, like as a vendor or threat intel or looking at the reports, you can see there are certain things that are top. So there will be like spear phishing emails are probably like #1. And so, people are going to get emails, they're going to click on them and what have you. So I'd say, yeah, teach people about email security and the dangers of dodgy links in that. But that might not be completely true for your organization. So look specifically at what it is. So I know that in Australia, there was a hedge fund, and this is a year and a half ago, and they got a phishing email, but it was actually a meeting invite. So the CEO, in his calendar, there was like a Zoom link there. It was, and we all have these invites in our calendars, and like we don't think about it, and you don't actually think about whether that's legitimate or not. But it was just there, so he clicked on it, and the meeting didn't start. So he thought, well, maybe it got cancelled or whatever. He didn't think twice about it, but that ended up stealing his email credentials in the background, and then they use it to commit fraud. So really, like, look at what sort of things are prevalent within your organization, or what things are the most risky or we don't have the biggest impact, and use that to work out what behavior is the most important to shift. But with given like the last few years and how that prevalence of remote working and cloud-based assets and everything, I'd say it's something around being careful around these communication channels. And if we can equip people with the right framework as to how to look at these things, then they can make the right decision regardless of the medium that it comes in from. Because we see phishing coming in, like not just emails, but it comes on SMS text messages now, the DMs on your Twitter or Instagram and all these sorts of things. So we need to look at not just teaching everyone, oh, if you're on Twitter, do this. If you're on Instagram, do this. If you're on TikTok, no, rather given the framework and the way to think about these things is more important, so that they shift their behavior overall and they can make those better risk decisions. Hope that answered the question. Cool. So there is stunned silence. So I'm assuming what I tell myself is I did such a fantastic job. I clarified every single question you possibly could have thought of. So you now have no questions. But I'll give you another 30 seconds. Otherwise, you can hold your silence. Oh, okay. There's another question. Oh, another question's come in. Why is ransomware so tricky to deal with? Oh, ransomware is a tricky thing. And I think one of the reasons that it is so tricky to deal with is because, so in security, you have like preventative controls, then you have monitoring controls, then you have response controls. And so for a long time, we had antivirus as like or firewalls and the perimeter defenses to be your kind of like preventative controls, and they weren't 100%. Like anything, nothing's 100%. So we saw a big shift into monitoring, threat detection, and response control. So a lot of the industry started to invest in that over the last 10 years. The problem with ransomware is that by the time you detect it, it's often too late. So it is something that you really do need to prevent. So beefing up those preventative controls is absolutely vital. And it's even more difficult because we've moved away from that centralized infrastructure. Everyone's working remotely these days and what have you. So we need to look at how it gets in and what we can do to do that. And the NCSC has a really good infographic around stopping phishing, and they've got like make it difficult for the email to reach or the attack to reach the network. Make it so you have your prevention controls and your email gateways and your filters, and then you have like the human layer in there, like teach people how to spot these and report these if need be. Then you have the next layer, which is like to have really fast and effective monitoring controls, which is again is a hard thing to do because oftentimes the alerts are there, but they don't show up till after the fact. And then the final is to have some recovery controls, like do you have backups in place? Do you have this in place? Do you have some snapshots in place? Can you recover them and what have you? So I think it's about like, because it's so critical to have all these aspects in place and to detect it quick or to prevent it from coming in, something's always going to get through. And ransomware, by its very nature, because it's so public and so noisy, it's not something that can go away or tackled with one technique. It's a multitude of techniques that we need to prevent it. Cool. Okay, what do you think is the biggest phishing threat right now? Well, so by volume, the biggest threat is still email phishing. But I think in terms of like, even though it's not the same amount of volume, but probably the biggest threat I'd say is like SMS-based, like text message-based phishing attacks. And that's because it's really hard on a phone to see where a link goes. And when it comes through, we're less likely programmed to question it. And also because our phone's with us pretty much all the time, it's really easy to catch someone unaware when they wake up and they haven't, they're bleary-eyed and they see a text message. Oh, it's my COVID jab booster thing. I'll click it, and you go through. And so it's really easy to fool. It's easier to fool someone on a phone into clicking something and going through the motion. So I think mobile-based attacks is probably where I'd say is like where we probably see the bigger threats. It might not be the same in terms of volume as we see in emails, because that's cheaper and quicker and easier to do. But that's definitely where I'd see it's heading. Cool. Thanks, Party. Appreciate your comment. Fantastic. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up now. Thank you, everyone, for participating, for your time. I hope that was useful. My contact details are there if you want to get in touch. But otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Javad.